There are rules that don't sound like rules at first. They arrive disguised as ordinary instructions, polite, precise, almost harmless. Feed her, read to her, don't upset her. But in certain houses, obedience is not kindness, it is containment. And something is always listening for the moment you hesitate. In one room, a doll that should be lifeless learns the rhythm of your voice. In another, a child you cannot fully see responds to commands that were never meant for human ears. And somewhere deeper, beneath the logic of both, there is a system that does not care what you believe is real. It only records whether you comply. The worst part is not that something is watching you. It is that it begins to recognize you as part of its structure. And once you are identified, the story does not end. It continues using you. The air in Phoenix was not merely hot, it was a samoom, a scorching wind from the depths of Jahannam that withered the soul. At 1:30 a.m., the asphalt of Indian School Road felt like the floor of a forgotten tomb. I pulled my aging Camry into the McDonald's drive-thru, the silence of the night heavy and unnatural, as if the karun, the hidden companions of the unseen, were watching from the shadows. The speaker crackled to life, but the voice that emerged was too bright, a silver bell ringing in a graveyard. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get you?" I began to order, but she cut me off with a gasp of recognition that made the hair on my neck rise. "Oh my God, is that you? Pull up to the window now!" Her urgency felt like a sear, a binding spell I couldn't resist. When I reached the window, I saw her. She was beautiful, yes, but her eyes held a frantic shimmer, like a person possessed by a hatif, a calling spirit. She looked at my balding head and my rusted car as if I were a sultan returning from war. "You look even better in person," she whispered, her hands trembling. It was a lie so profound it tasted like ash. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythmic warning. This wasn't romance, this was the desperation of a soul trying to escape a ghoulish fate. "You should totally give me your number," she pleaded, her fingers twisting a lock of hair with a rhythmic, obsessive intensity. "Or maybe I could come home with you, just for a bit. Please." Her voice had shifted. The feigned flirtation had rotted away, revealing a raw, jagged terror. The sound of a captive pleading with a passerby before the Malak al-Maut claims their breath. She wasn't hitting on me. She was begging for sanctuary. I felt a coldness settle in my marrow that the Arizona heat could not touch. "No, I don't even know you," I stammered, my hand hovering over the gear shift. "Can I just get my food?" The moment the words left my lips, the mask shattered. Her eyes grew wide, reflecting a darkness behind her that I couldn't yet see. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and iron. Suddenly, a thunderous boom erupted from the shadows of the kitchen, a sound like a heavy sarcophagus lid being slammed shut. The girl's face turned the color of bone. "Call 911, she hissed, her voice a fragile thread. "Please, call." Before I could process her plea, a figure emerged from the gloom like a shaitan rising from the smoke. Clad in a black mask, he moved with a predatory grace. He reached out and seized her hair, yanking her head back with a sickening snap. An ear-piercing scream tore through the humid night, a sound that felt like it was being etched into my very soul. "Shut the fuck up," the assailant roared, his voice a guttural rasp that sounded less human and more like the growl of a Mareed unleashed. With a brutal, fluid motion, he slammed her face into the cold stainless steel counter. The sound was wet and final. A spray of crimson blossomed across the drive-through window, a macabre veil separating my world from her living nightmare. I sat frozen, a man caught in the gaze of a basilisk. Time stretched into a sickening barzakh, the liminal space between life and death. A second shadow manifested from the grease-stained darkness, wielding a long, serrated blade that glinted like the cursed metal of an ancient danab. "Where's the safe? Where's the fucking money?" he shrieked at the broken girl. "I don't know the combination. I'm just—" she sobbed, her voice bubbling through the blood in her throat. The first monster struck her again, a heavy, meat-fisted blow that sent her collapsing out of my line of sight. The vacuum of her absence was filled with the frantic realization of my own mortality. My hands, slick with cold sweat, fumbled for my phone. It slipped, clattering into the footwell like a dying bird, before I snatched it back. I slammed the door locks down, a fragile ward against the zulm, oppression, unfolding inches away. As I dialed 911, the man with the knife looked up. His eyes met mine through the glass, hollow, void of light, the eyes of one who had invited an ifrit to sit at his table. The killer lunged toward the window, his movements fueled by a malevolent jinn-like fury. Adrenaline surged, and I slammed the Camry into reverse. The tires wailed against the pavement, a desperate lament as I retreated from the kill zone. On the phone, the dispatcher's voice was a distant hum from a world that still made sense, while I bore witness to an act of facade, pure corruption. Through the window, the scene was a tableau of carnage. The girl, Maria, lay motionless on the tiles. They were kicking her, their boots falling with the heavy thud of a gravedigger's shovel, but the air remained eerily silent. She was no longer screaming. She was drifting into the gaib, the unseen realm where pain ceases to exist. Then, the one with the serrated blade knelt. I could not see the blade's work, only the rhythmic motion of his shoulders, like a priest performing a forbidden ritual. When he stood, he held a butcher's knife, a heavy cleaver that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. From its edge hung a glistening, ropey length of intestine, swaying like a pendulum of meat. His hands were drenched in a deep, ritualistic crimson, dripping onto the floor as he turned to his partner. They fled into the back of the establishment, vanishing into the dark like shadows retreating before the dawn. His voice broke. "Are you asleep now?" But he already knew the answer. The eyes, those unnatural, glistening eyes, remained wide open, unblinking, watching, waiting. This wasn't about sleep. This was about obedience. I think you're asleep," he whispered, forcing a weak smile as he slowly stepped back. "So I'm just going to—" A sound cut through the air, sharp, violent, heat. He froze. Silence. Then again, closer this time. "Heat! Heat!" The voice wasn't human. It scraped through the darkness like something dragged across stone, ancient and furious, not spoken aloud, forced into existence. His chest tightened. Panic surged. No, I followed the rules," he muttered. The shadows convulsed. Something moved behind him, fast, too fast. A sudden rush of air slammed into his back, as if something unseen had lunged and stopped just inches away. His breath became ragged. "Please, I did everything." A whisper answered, right beside his ear, cold as the grave. Not complete. The room trembled. The doll's head snapped upward with a sickening crack. Its mouth widened, far beyond what cloth and stitching should allow. From within it, darkness spilled, not emptiness, but depth, like a gate to something buried beneath existence. A name echoed from that void, not Cindy, something older, something bound, something that had been fed. Ah, dear, I am present. The lights died. Total darkness swallowed the room, and in that suffocating void, the last thing he felt was something small, cold, gripping his hand. Before we dive into the scariest part of the story, I want to know, where are you listening from right now? Don't forget to comment if your heart is racing. If you're new here, subscribe or follow now to join this journey of fear. In Eugene, Oregon, the forests and mountains wrap around the city like a shroud, and the night air carries a damp, ancient chill, the kind of cold that feels like the touch of a ghoul. It was 2 a.m. when I found myself navigating Willamette Street. I was intoxicated, my mind clouded by the fermented spirits of the party, stumbling in a zigzag pattern that felt less like a drunk walk and more like a chaotic dance to ward off the afreet lurking in the trees. My hunger was a physical ache, a craving for those golden fries that felt like a life or death necessity. The McDonald's sign loomed ahead, a sickly yellow glow piercing the mountain mist. It looked like a lighthouse for the damned. As I approached, the parking lot was a void, silent, empty, and heavy with a stillness that felt najas, unclean. All the lights were blazing inside, illuminating the empty registers and sterile plastic chairs, but there was no sign of human life. The doors were bolted shut against the night. I hammered on the glass, my fists echoing like a drum in a vacant temple. "Hey, y'all open?" I bellowed, my voice swallowed by the surrounding woods. I pressed my face against the cold pane, peering into the fluorescent haze. Deep in the back, past the friars and the shadows, something moved. It wasn't the brisk movement of a night shift worker. It was a slow, deliberate shifting of weight. I caught a glimpse of color, vibrant, jarring, and entirely wrong for the hour. A tall figure began to emerge from the darkness of the kitchen, stepping slowly into the light of the front counter. When the figure finally stepped under the harsh halogen glow, my breath hitched. It was a man dressed as Ronald McDonald, but the sight was a caboose, a living nightmare. This was no joyful mascot, it was a desecration. The red and yellow striped shirt was frayed, and the massive red wig sat crookedly upon his head like a scalped trophy. But it was the face that truly chilled my blood. The white grease paint was cracked and peeling, and the painted red smile had been extended upward, reaching toward his ears in a jagged, permanent sneer that resembled the ritualistic scarring of a djinn. Hey man," I stammered, my bravado evaporating like mist. "You guys still serving? I just want some fries." The words died in my throat. The creature didn't speak. Instead, he tilted his head at a sharp, unnatural angle, reminiscent of a scavenger bird sensing carrion. His eyes, dark and hollow within the painted mask, locked onto mine. Then his face contorted. The painted smile seemed to stretch even wider, an impossible orifice of malice. Without a sound, he suddenly bolted. He didn't run like a man. He moved with the frantic, predatory speed of a nas, charging directly at the glass door where I stood. The impact was deafening. He slammed his body against the glass, the rattle in its frame as if it were about to shatter into 1,000 daggers. His hands, encased in oversized white gloves, splayed flat against the pane. Then came the sound, a high-pitched rhythmic cackling that pierced the night air, a sound of pure junoon, madness. The high-pitched laughter followed me like a curse as I turned and fled. My legs, heavy with the weight of the alcohol, felt like they were sinking into Sijin, the depths of the underworld. I could hear the metal doorframe groaning behind me, the sound of a predator finally forcing its way out of its cage. Every shadow beneath the trees seemed to twist into the shape of that yellow-clad monstrosity. I reached the park across the street, a dark expanse where the ancient pines stood like silent sentinels of the ghaib. I collapsed behind a cold stone bench, my chest heaving, trying to swallow my own breath so he wouldn't hear the frantic rhythm of my heart. The silence of the park was absolute, yet I felt a presence, the heavy, suffocating weight of an al-Subyan watching from the dark. Then the sound returned. Clack, clack, clack. The oversized shoes hit the pavement with a rhythmic, wet thud, and beneath it all, that incessant, manic giggling. He was close. I pressed my forehead against the damp earth, praying to be invisible, as the footsteps stopped exactly on the other side of the stone. A terrifying calm settled over the world, as if time itself had been suspended by a seer of silence. I waited, paralyzed, until the dragging footsteps finally began to fade into the distance, leaving me alone with the rustle of the leaves. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my lungs burning as I held back a sob. When the silence finally felt heavy enough to be real, I dared to peek over the edge of the bench. The street was a desolate gray ribbon, empty of any yellow-clad spirits. I exhaled, a ragged sound of relief, and began to stand. But the air above me shifted, a sudden displacement of wind that felt like the beating of a zoba's wings. Something heavy and wet dropped from the branches of the ancient tree directly above me. I screamed, a raw sound of pure khuf, terror, as the figure landed with a sickening thud. He was right there, 2 inches from my face. The smell of grease and rotting face paint filled my nostrils. The painted smile was even more grotesque up close, a jagged canyon of red smeared over white skin. In my panic to escape, my feet tangled, a curse of the booze and the fear, and I slammed face first into the unforgiving concrete. My skin tore, the metallic taste of blood mingling with the grit of the earth. The world tilted and spun. My stomach, revolted by the terror and the spirits, finally gave way. I collapsed onto my hands and knees, retching violently, my body purging itself as I lay broken in the dirt. I was at my most vulnerable, a wretched soul at the feet of a monster. As I lay there in the filth, I saw those massive red shoes enter my peripheral vision. They were caked in mud and something darker, standing perfectly still. The laughter stopped. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the park, the kind that precedes the appearance of a Dajjal. I looked up through blurred eyes, expecting the final blow, but the creature simply stood there, staring down at me with an expressionless, painted gaze. He watched my humiliation with the cold curiosity of a jinn observing a dying insect. Then, without a word or another sound, he turned. He began to walk back toward the golden arches, whistling a jaunty, distorted tune that echoed off the trees like a funeral dirge. I remained in my own vomit for 10 minutes, paralyzed by a rob, overwhelming dread so deep I forgot how to breathe. Eventually, I crawled away, taking the longest path home, feeling as though I was being watched by every shadow in Eugene. The next day, the sun revealed a world that pretended to be normal. The manager at the McDonald's looked at me with pity when I asked about the clown, claiming Ronald had been retired for years, an old god cast into the void. My friends think it was a hallucination, a trick played by the shaitan of alcohol, but I know what I saw. I still feel the vibration of the glass door as he slammed against it. I still see that smile, stretched wide by a malice that doesn't belong to this world. I no longer walk the streets at night, for I know that in the darkness of Eugene, some masks never come off. The next part of this story will fill your mind with terror. Where are you sitting? How scared are you? Don't forget to comment. New viewers, subscribe or follow now. Bakersfield, California is a land of dust and oil, a place where the air feels as heavy as a qabr, a grave, and nothing ever changes. It was late March when the qadr, the divine decree of fate, led my friend Samson and me toward the Highway 99. By 11:30 p.m., the hunger in Samson's stomach was a howling ghoul, demanding to be fed. The golden arches appeared on the horizon like a false oasis in a desert of shadows. The parking lot was a void of desolation. Aside from my car, only a battered, rusted Honda sat near the dumpsters, looking like a derelict vessel abandoned by a fleeing soul. Despite the emptiness, the drive-thru glowed with a sickly, artificial light. We pulled up to the speaker, but the silence that greeted us was absolute, a samt so deep it felt like the world had ended. "Hello? Anyone there?" Samson shouted into the metal box. Static hissed back, sounding like the whispers of a waswas, the tempter that speaks in the ears of men. Then the sound of frantic, heavy footsteps echoed from within the building. The drive-through window slid open with a sharp metallic screech, and a man appeared. His name tag read Derek, but he looked like a man who had just looked into the mouth of Jahannam. He was drenched in sweat despite the midnight chill, his eyes darting around as if he were being hunted by an invisible ifrit.
Sorry, I was taking out the trash," Derek panted, his voice a ragged edge of a blade. He wiped his brow with a trembling sleeve, leaving a faint dark smear across his forehead. "What do you want? Please keep it short. I'm about to close." As Samson rattled off our order, I felt a heavy spiritual dread, a dick in my chest. Something was fundamentally broken in the air around this man. Through the fluorescent haze of the window, I watched him. He moved with a frantic, jerky energy, as if his limbs were being pulled by the strings of a malevolent marid. He wasn't just working, he was purging the evidence of something terrible. "Samson," I whispered, nudging my friend, Look at that guy's apron. The white fabric was no longer clean. It was splattered with a deep, viscous crimson, not the bright chemical red of ketchup, but the dark, iron-rich hue of damn blood. It looked as if he had been standing in a rain of slaughter. Derek caught me staring and immediately began wiping his hands on the stains, his fingers shaking so violently he nearly dropped the bags. He thrust the food toward us, his eyes wide and vacant, like a man who had already lost his soul to the shaitan. Before I could even offer the cash, the window slammed shut, sealing him back into his private hell.
I steered the car away, but the air inside the cabin felt tainted, as if we had inhaled the buhar of a charnel house. My gut twisted with a premonition of shar, impending evil. We were 10 minutes down the desolate highway when Samson began to rummage through the grease-stained bags. "Yo, where's my smoothie?" he grumbled, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "My strawberry smoothie? It's not here! Dude forgot it!" I sighed, a heavy sound that felt like a prayer for patience. "You want me to go back?" "I mean, why not? We paid for it," Samson insisted, oblivious to the fitna I felt brewing in the darkness. "The least he can do is give us our full order." Against every instinct screaming in my soul, I took the next exit and looped back. As we pulled back into the lot, the golden arches flickered like a dying star. The drive-through window was now a black void, the closed sign gleaming in the glass like a barrier between the living and the dead. "Are you serious?" Samson stepped out of the car, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the asphalt. He marched toward the locked front doors, his frustration mounting. "Nah, that guy's probably still here. His car is right there." He pointed toward the rusted Honda, which sat like a silent witness to a crime. He began to walk toward the back of the building, toward the service entrance, and I followed, fearful of leaving him alone in the presence of the unseen. The rear of the McDonald's was a sanctuary of rot. The air was thick with the stench of scorched oil and the cloying, sweet odor of najis, decaying filth. Above the metal service door, a single dim bulb flickered like a dying eye. Samson reached out to knock, but my gaze was pulled toward the industrial dumpster. Something was wrong. Protruding from the shadows of the rusted metal bin were 2 legs, pale, motionless, and horribly bare. "Samson," I choked out, the word catching in a throat constricted by khauf, terror. He followed my gaze. We stepped closer, drawn by a morbid cadre we could not escape. My heart didn't just beat, it hammered against my ribs like a prisoner trying to escape a collapsing cell. The legs were a tapestry of horror, raw, shredded muscle hung in crimson strips, and the jagged white shards of bone pierced through the meat like the tusks of an ancient behemoth. Samson gripped the edge of the dumpster and hauled himself up to peer into the depths. He recoiled instantly, his face the color of ash as he gagged on the rising bile. "Don't look," he hissed, but it was too late. I saw the remains. The body was face down, or where a face should have been. It had been hacked and mutilated with a ritualistic ferocity, the limbs twisted into impossible, broken angles. It was no longer a man, it was a sacrifice left for the ghouls of the highway. Samson's hands shook with such violence that his phone clattered against the pavement twice before he could summon the authorities. We stood by the car, our breath coming in ragged gasps as the distant wail of sirens began to tear through the stagnant night. When the police arrived, they draped the area in yellow tape, a symbolic circle of protection against the zulm, evil that had occurred. The employee, I told the detective, my voice sounding like it belonged to a ghost. Derek, he was here. He handed us the food. The detective's expression hardened, a look of grim recognition. Those weren't ketchup stains, he muttered, his voice cold as the grave. The search of the kitchen revealed a scene from the lowest pits of Jahannam, bloody handprints smeared across the walls like dark sear, and a trail of gore leading to the back door. The victim was Marcus Williams, a 23-year-old soul whose life had been harvested by a co-worker in a fit of demonic rage. Derek Turner was hunted down 3 days later, cowering in a nearby town, with the dried dum of his victim still clinging to his shoes like a curse. It has been a year, but the shadows of Bakersfield still follow me. Samson fled to Oregon to escape the memories, but some things cannot be outrun. I still see those shredded legs every time I close my eyes. I think about the burgers we held in our hands, food prepared by a man who had just finished butchering a human being. I realize now that we didn't just buy a meal. We stepped into the bloody wake of a murderer, and the golden arches will forever be a monument to the day I looked into the eyes of a monster and saw nothing but the void.
The story will get scarier as it goes on. Where are you listening from? Is your heart pounding? Comment below. New viewers, subscribe now.